Hello and welcome to the Health Data Ethics Podcast. I'm your host, Jenny Owens, and I'm here today bringing you a long overdue episode, but one that I really wanted to take my time and do a lot of good research on pending legislation in the state of Ohio around artificial intelligence. So we're going to do a rundown of 4 bills on the table that are in House committee or Senate committee in the state of Ohio, compare and contrast them with some similar legislation in other states, and then talk about what these bills might mean for healthcare artificial intelligence in the state. Florida folks, can't wait to do a similar dive for you. Cleveland Clinic spans both Ohio and Florida, and so I'm starting my regulatory deep dive on these 2 states, and we'll expand even further. But for right now, we're going to focus on the state of Ohio and 4 bills. So just to kind of back up and talk a little bit about our context here, we've talked previously about how the federal government has actually declined to put forth any sort of federal AI regulation or federal privacy regulation, and they have actually been toying with the idea of banning the states from doing something very similar. Right now, state level regulation is filling this gap in oversight, and we're seeing some states emerge as leaders, some states emerge as very conservative forces in AI regulation. And it was really interesting to tackle Ohio's bills and to see, where is my state going to fall? All of this is coming hot on the heels of me just being in Columbus for the OhioX AI Summit this past week, where I got to see some of our elected officials talk about how they're thinking about artificial intelligence. In particular, Frank LaRose, our Secretary of State, was talking about using artificial intelligence to modernize election official training materials. Just a really great, very low risk use of artificial intelligence so that our election officials can work with a digital system rather than try to page through a huge PDF or a physical binder when they're doing election proceedings. Really good stuff. The bills on the table in Ohio right now span 4 very different domains. So one of them is specifically about sexual content and deepfakes and use of people's likenesses without their permission. And then we've got bills that tackle things as specific as the use of artificial intelligence by health insurers, all the way through, hey, do you have a right to do artificial intelligence in the state of Ohio? And is AI its own thing? If corporations are people, is artificial intelligence also a people? Or is it not? Is it not legally going to be given personhood? So the state of Ohio is really kind of wrapping their arms around all of artificial intelligence at once. And this is really fascinating. All of these have interesting implications for healthcare. So let's get started. I want to walk through each bill one at a time, compare and contrast a little bit, and talk about what the bill says and what it means for healthcare. And the first one I want to talk about is Ohio Senate Bill 217. It is an AI-generated pornography prohibition. It is currently the Ohio State Senate Committee. And what it does is it requires AI-generated products to have a watermark. Interesting. It prohibits simulated child pornography or child sexual material, and it prohibits identity fraud using a replica of a person. And so this is really intended to be aligned with the Take It Down Act at the federal level, one of the very few pieces of federal legislation that is aimed at artificial intelligence, in particular, the use of a replica of somebody's likeness without their information or their consent, in particular, the use of people's simulated likenesses for sexual materials, right? Nobody should be able to make pornography of me without my permission. Nobody should be able to steal my face and my body or my voice and use that for sexual purposes without my permission. That's not okay. It's nice to know that Ohio is aligned with the federal government on this. Where I think it's really interesting is that products generated by artificial intelligence should have a watermark. I'm going to put a pin in this and we're going to come back to this. This is an interesting way to think about transparency in the use of artificial intelligence. But I also wanted to take a look and see what other states have deepfake pornography laws. At least 17 states currently have laws on the books that refer to online impersonation done with an intent to intimidate or bully or harass a person. And then there are at least 40 states that have bills in preparation to ban deceptive audio or visual media, in particular sexual media. The interesting thing, going back to this idea, this first provision in the Ohio bill says that AI-produced material should be labeled. This has really big implications for the use of AI in healthcare. So when you're using, for example, a voice agent to call a patient and do a appointment reminder, or if you're calling a patient to remind them that, hey, they might need to be screened for colorectal cancer or lung cancer, it means that AI media really needs to be labeled up front so that people know in advance that they're dealing with an artificially generated piece of content. I think this is good. I think it encourages transparency. I think it furthers an atmosphere of trust that I know. I'm not advocating that people, that these things be labeled so that people can avoid them. Although obviously people will, if you don't want to deal with an artificially generated, avatar or a phone call, that's fine. That's your right as an Ohioan. But I do believe that you should have a right to know when your media is generated by artificial intelligence versus when is it a human being on the other end. This is important. It's something to keep in mind for healthcare organizations as you're looking at artificial intelligence, particularly for issues of patient communication. Those should be labeled. It would be nice to have them labeled. Ohio House Bill 392, the Ohio Right to Compute Act. This is also currently in the Ohio House Committee. And what it is a bill asserting a right for Ohioans freely to compute. And it really does two things. It says that first, that no political subdivision, so no smaller political entity in Ohio can restrict computation, particularly for the purposes of artificial intelligence, without a compelling governmental interest, and that any AI system that controls a critical infrastructure facility shall implement a risk management policy in line with the NIST risk management framework, the ISO standard, and it must be compliant with all applicable federal regulations. Notably, this requirement to manage the risk does not apply if the AI is capable of completing only non-executive tasks of a procedural or preparatory nature, or if it's only implementing decisions made by a human, or if the AI is exclusively an antivirus, anti-malware, or a cybersecurity tool. Okay. So what does this mean? This is actually a huge statement of position for the state of Ohio. This is the clearest direction that we've had, I think, as a state. You, as an Ohioan, have a right to compute and a responsibility to manage the risk. This is really important for healthcare because not only does this assert the right of healthcare facilities, it's any entity, right? A legal person, a human person, or an organization. Healthcare controls a critical infrastructure, right? Healthcare is critical infrastructure. It's in line with your utilities, with your right to access water or your power. And so if you are going to do artificial intelligence, you do need, in this bill, if it is passed, you will need to implement a risk management policy for it. Very important. I did some research on how other states were also thinking about the right to compute or the right not to compute. And I thought that this was interesting. Idaho had a Senate bill that is not passed that explicitly recognized computation as free speech and protected AI as an extension of human thought and creativity that was subject to the same protections and responsibilities of free speech. In Montana, they actually signed their Senate Bill 212 in April, and that aligns the right to own and make use of technology with the right to possess property. And therefore, your right to compute is subject to the same protections as your right to own property. Really fascinating. So is AI speech? Maybe. Is it property? Maybe. Either way, in Ohio, if this bill is passed, our ability to use it is protected, and it's protected in a way that does not absolve us of the responsibility to manage its risk. The other interesting thing is that this bill prohibits any political subdivisions from restricting your right to compute. So I think about anybody who watches the podcast knows that I think about the sort of concern and moral concern about recombinant DNA and how the city of Cambridge actually restricted the use of recombinant DNA. If this bill were passed in the state of Ohio, it would guarantee this right for all Ohioans, and the city of Cleveland, for example, could not restrict our ability to compute because that's a right that's guaranteed by the state. Really interesting. Now we're getting into the really important stuff for healthcare. Ohio Senate Bill 164, the use of AI by health insurers. This is currently in the Ohio Senate Committee. This regulates the use of AI and algorithms by health insurers. Specifically, it asks for documentation of whether a health insurance plan is using, or will use AI for its insurance plans. And if it does, it asks for additional information. What are the algorithm criteria? What data sets did you use to train the algorithm? The algorithm itself, can we have that too? What are the outcomes of the software in which the algorithm is used? This is important. We're going to come back to this. And then number 5 is data on the amount of time a human reviewer spends examining an adverse determination prior to signing off on it. So if you're, as proposed, if you're a health insurance plan in the state of Ohio and you're using artificial intelligence, you're required to essentially publish kind of a model card about your algorithm, and it's going to be published publicly if this bill is not changed. Additionally, this bill forbids health plans to make decisions denying, delaying, or modifying healthcare based solely on the results from AI. So we can't automate our denials. We can't automate modifications. Any decision to delay, deny, or modify healthcare that's made by a human being in collaboration with artificial intelligence must be accompanied by a plain language explanation of the rationale that is used in making that decision. So an AI can't independently decide to deny your claim. And also, if a human being and AI decide together to deny your claim, then that you're required to receive a plain language explanation. What happened? Why did we make this decision? Why is this interesting? The idea that we might have publicly available information on how health insurers are using artificial intelligence is mind-boggling to me. This is so exciting. It would be such a rich data set to be able to look at how insurance plans are training their algorithms. What are the algorithms being used for? And then this outcomes of the software in which the algorithm is used is so important to me as an AI governance person who cares a lot, not only about model and algorithm training, but also what happens to the human being or the AI agent who picks up the results of that algorithm and then does something with it. Those decision points also matter. And under this regulation, these would also be published. So this would be huge. So what does this mean for healthcare? This means that we would have the ability to kind of peek under the hood a little bit at how our healthcare plan providers are, how they're thinking about algorithms. What data are they using to train them? In what settings are they looking to use artificial intelligence? This is amazing and knowledge, not only for a provider organization, not only for health plans, but also for patients. This is huge. And to have this information available publicly would be such a boon. It would make Ohio a really transparent state specifically for healthcare artificial intelligence. Last but certainly not least, and really intriguing, is Ohio House Bill 469, the denial of AI personhood. This is currently in Ohio House Committee. And what this bill says is that AI systems cannot have legal personhood and that they cannot be treated as persons under the law. Okay, so cool. Why does this matter? This matters a lot because people can be held liable for their actions. And what this law is really doing is putting the responsibility for artificial intelligence on the developers, deployers, and vendors. I'm borrowing the framework from the EU AI Act here a little bit, but it's putting the responsibility on the human beings, the legal human beings who are developing, deploying, and selling artificial intelligence, people who are using it, essentially. So you will not be able to shed responsibility onto an AI itself, saying that, hey, this is a person, it bears its own responsibility. Proposed legislation that says that's not the case. People are always responsible. Other states have done this as well. Idaho put out a bill that explicitly prohibited artificial intelligence from being granted personhood in Idaho. Utah also has a bill in process that prohibits governmental entities from recognizing personhood for non-human entities, which includes artificial intelligence. This is really important when we're thinking about automation, AI autonomy, and liability. It's always going to be a human being or an organization of human beings that is going to hold the legal accountability for AI's actions, not the AI itself. The really important thing that I want to wrap up with here, and I know this episode is going a little bit long. My apologies. This is a really fun one to research. Ohio's bills really show how a lot of states are experimenting with the boundaries about artificial intelligence. What does it mean to have freedom of expression when you might be expressing yourself using artificial intelligence? What does it mean if an AI system is autonomous? Does that mean that it can have legal responsibility or not? What does it mean for a system to be fair, to be safe? People required to publish publicly? And what can you keep under your hood as your own intellectual property? And then it's really important to continue to ask these sort of questions when you're deploying AI in your health system. Who is accountable for decisions? Who is the human being who bears that responsibility? If you were required to publish information about your algorithm, how it was trained, and what the actions are based on the model output, are you able to do so? Always, it's such a good idea to keep an eye on your local, state, and relevant federal laws to make sure that you are compliant with what you're required to do from a regulatory perspective when you're deploying artificial intelligence. And in all of these things, we do have a moral responsibility to consider the rights of individuals when AI is used: patients, providers, and payers, all of these.